Hello class, in this video we're going to go over some common key concepts of Module 12, and we'll go through one of the example projects so we can set a storyline and help you better relate to how to apply the concepts that we're going to learn in this video and in this module. So before we start, we're going to set the precedence here with a little storyline on the different things that we'll be doing in this workbook. So we're going to set the storyline as John is an admissions director at Abernathy Academy, a private secondary school in Roswell, Georgia. He's developing an Excel workbook to track and record tuition payments from registered students, which he and his staff record weekly. He's asking us, or asking you, for your help in automating the workbook. Alright, so with that said, we're going to start right here in the payments worksheet. And in the payment worksheet, we're going to unprotect this so that way we can edit whatever we want within it. Right, so to unprotect it, we always want to go here to the Review tab. And under the Protect group, you'll see that it says Unprotect Sheet, which means that this particular worksheet is already protected. Had this been saying unprotect workbook, then the entire workbook, meaning all the worksheets within the workbooks, would be protected. But we can also protect individual sheets. So the first thing we want to do is simply click on Unprotect Sheets, and now we are able to edit and do whatever we want to the sheet. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is to include a title at the top of the worksheet, similar to the ones in the rest of the workbook that we can take a look at here. Similar to that, basically. Alright, so we're going to insert word art using Fill Gray Accent Color 1 Shadow style. We're going to type Payments by Account as a worksheet title, and then we're going to change that font size to 28 points and then move the word art to row 1 so that it spans from column C through column F. So here is row 1, so we want it basically to span from here to here. Right, so fairly easy to do this. We're going to click on Insert. Then we're going to go here to the text group, click on Word Art, and then we're going to select the particular kind of word art that we want, which is Fill Gray Accent Color 1. Fill Gray Accent Color 1 Shadow. There it is. Okay, so we're going to select that. It's going to give you just a generic name initially, and this is where you're going to type in your title. In this case, it's going to be Payments by Account. Payments by Account. Capitalize that account there, and then we're going to resize it basically, but first, before we do that, we're going to change that to from 54 to 28 points, so it'll be a little bit smaller, be easier to fit here. Now that we've done that, we're going to just drag it up here, and you could have modified it while you placed it up here already, but either way is fine, so long as we have it spread out from C through F, just like that on the first row. That's exactly what we want. Now you can see that Payments by Amount seems to be a little bit further towards the top of the box here of this word art. So we can easily just go back to home here and just make this both vertically and horizontally aligned in the middle or in the center. Alright, so that gives it a little bit more of a easier way to look at it. So it's pretty familiar to what we have here now. Right. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to clear the print area from this worksheet. We thought that we wanted to print this, but now we changed our mind and we no longer need to do so. So we're going to clear the print area from the worksheet. So in order to do this, the first thing you want to go to is Page Layout right here. And once you're in Page Layout, we're just going to click on Print Titles, and that's going to open up the Page Setup dialog box. Now, just because it says Print Titles doesn't mean you can't create headers or margins of pages here, but it'll take you directly to the spot where we want for the particular title. So Print Area is found within the Page Setup dialog box and within the Sheet tab of the Page Setup dialog box, and you'll see Print Area right here. So right now, it's Accounts All, which selects the entire table there. We don't want that. We're just going to take that out. We're going to clear it, and then we're going to click OK. So now we no longer have the print areas filled out. All right, the next thing we want to do is to go to the entry form worksheet, which is right here. So we're going to click on that so we can access that worksheet. And the admission staff will use this worksheet to enter tuition payments and summarize tuition information. John wants to make it easy to record the payments and avoid errors. In cell 3, add data validation list that accepts only the values in the range I3 through I-203. So the first thing we want to do is select C3 right there. And as you can see, AC 1031 is the first one that we see here. So we ultimately want to limit anybody that's going to be using this form from entering any other account ID that is not listed within this range here. And that's what we listed earlier, which is I3, which is right here, all the way through I-203, which is way down there, right? Last one is there, 1065. The numbers vary. So we're going to make sure that everything is on the that's on this list is the only account IDs that are going to be able to be placed in here. That means the format's going to have to be identical as well. Okay. So the first thing we did was, again, select C3, make sure that's the active cell that we're going to play around with, and then we're going to go to the Data tab. From the Data tab, we're going to go here to the Data Tools, click on the Data Validation drop-down list, and then click Data Validation right here. And now that we have the data validation dialog box up, we want to make sure that we allow certain types of information. In this case, we were asked to create a data validation list. So we are going to select list in the allow field drop-down box here, just like that. Now here it's asking us, all right, well, what is your source? What is the data that you want to limit or validate this particular field from being entered? So we're going to select a source, and in source we're just going to select I3 through I-203, just like that. We're going to scroll back up here. And sometimes you have to click the file on your taskbar again for that data validation to come up like I did there. And then we're going to click OK. All right, so that's going to prevent anybody from entering any account ID that isn't listed in this list. All right, makes it a lot easier for any errors to be placed in there when folks are using this spreadsheet in order to enter information within the form. All right, we're going to continue on with some more data validation. In this next data validation, we're going to select cell C4, which is here. So we're going to be dealing with different dates in this one. So here we're going to create another data validation rule that allows date values greater than or equal to 10/7/2021. We're also going to add an input message to the cell with the title date of payment and use the enter a date of 10/7/2021 or later as the input message. And we're going to also add a warning alert with the title invalid date as use verify the payment date. As the error message, that's what we're going to do. So we have an error message and we have an input message there as well. So just like we did last time with the last data validation, we're going to go to the Data tab, Data Tools, Data Validation dropdown, and we're going to click on Data Validation. In this case, we're going to, again, use a data validation for dates here. So just like we did in the previous one, instead of list, we're going to click on date. Right, and we want, again, the keyword here is greater than or equal to. Right now it's between two different dates. We don't want between two different dates. We want greater than or equal to one particular date. So we make sure to select the correct field option in the data field. And this is going to be greater than or equal to is what we want. So now we're left with just the start date. And the start date is going to be for this 10/7/2021. Just like that. All right, so we're not done yet. This is the settings. This is what we're going to base our validation for this data on. Next thing we're going to do is create our input message. So our input message is going to be date of payment. Just like that. And we're going to use the message of enter a date of 10/7/21 or later. So we're basically, this is going to be what users are going to be able to see here. So make sure the spelling is correct. Double check your spelling on this. Date of 10-7-2021 or later. Just like that. Okay, we're going to put a period on there for us. And that's going to be our input message. Now we're going to jump into the error alert. And here's where we're going to be able to do a warning, right? So under styles, we have stop, warning, and information. So we're just going to put a warning there, and we're going to call this particular warning invalid dates. Invalid dates. All right, so if somebody tries to put a invalid date in that particular cell C4, then this is what they will get as an error message or a warning message. Okay, invalid date, and in the error message we're going to put invalid. Oh, I'm sorry, verify the payment date. So we're going to tell them to do verify the payment date. Period. Right, and then we're going to click on OK. That's it. OK, and it is done, right? So now anytime you click on that cell, it's going to tell you right off the bat, enter a date of 10 or 7. And if you try to enter anything else, you're going to get that particular error message that we created, the warning message that we created. So that is what the data validation does. So let's move on from here. And the next thing we want to do is to get rid of, or not necessarily get rid of, because we're referencing all this data here, but we don't necessarily want the users of this form to be able to see all this data here. It's just unnecessary. It's too much, and it might be even confusing. So what we want to do is just hide this column here with our information that is being referred to in the data validation for C4, or excuse me, for C3. So simply hide it. Well, we can always manually hide it by doing this, right? But that doesn't always work very well. We'd have to do multiple different columns for that to work. So what we want to do is right click and then just click on hide that particular cell, just like that. So that doesn't mean that we've deleted that column. As you can see, HJ, right? We're missing I. That means it's just right there. And you can see that that borderline between the two adjacent columns looks a little different than most of the other column borders between different columns. So you can see there's double lines here, meaning there's a hidden column there. All right, so now we're going to jump in and start doing a macro. So we're going to continue on with the storyline first so you can get an understanding of how this macro is going to be used. And it goes something like this. After users enter the account ID, which is ultimately going to be here, account ID, the date, as well as the amount paid, after users enters, we ultimately want them to click on Enter Payment button, which is right here, to add the record to the late payments table, right, on the payments worksheet. So by entering information here, clicking on Enter Payments, we want that information ultimately to be placed in this area here. Okay. So what we're going to do is record a macro, and we're going to name that macro enter_payment stored in the current workbook, within this workbook. That means that why does it give us the current workbook option? Because if you have multiple workbooks opened at the same time and you try to create macros, you will be able to see all the macros for every open workbook that you have. You can modify the dialog box to only show macros within the current workbook that you're working on. But you have to make sure that when you create a macro that it's going to be for the current workbook and it doesn't affect other workbooks. The last thing you want to do is enter a payment and have that be applied to multiple workbooks that you didn't intend to have it work for. So make sure to always understand that concept to avoid problems from occurring. All right, so to develop or to create a macro, we need to go to the developer's website, or tab, excuse me, and then within the code group, we're going to click on record macro. So the first thing we're asked to do is to add a particular title for this macro, and this macro is going to be called late payment, okay, which is identical to what this button here says, right? So ultimately we're going to apply this macro we're about to record to that enter payment button here, so that we can just click on this payment and it'll run the macro for us. And make sure this workbook is selected here, store macro in this workbook, not personal macro workbook or new workbook. We want to deal with this workbook here. If we had other workbooks open, we would have other options here as well. So the next thing we want to do is just click OK, and now you'll notice that this says stop recording, right? Which means we are recording right now. So anything you do right now is going to be ultimately a part of the code of what this macro is going to do. So here we go. So the first thing we want to do is go to the payments worksheet. Once we're in the payment worksheet, we're going to click on H4, which is right here. And then we're going to insert a table row above, and then click an empty cell, and then re-click on H4. Right? So it's a bit of a difficult sentence there, so let's repeat that. So insert a table above, so we're going to right click and go to insert, and we're going to do a table row above, just like that. And then we're going to click on an empty cell, which there's already an empty cell there. And then we're going to click on H4 again, which we are already there. So next thing we want to do is go to the entry form worksheet, just like that. And then copy the data in the range C3, C5, right? So we're going to just simply copy this data here and copy this. We want ultimately, again, the macro to do this for us, but we need to record these actions once for it to continue to do that afterwards. Okay, and then we're going to return back to the payment sheet. And then here we're going to click the paste arrow and then click transpose option, because our information was in a vertical format. We want it to be in horizontal format. Otherwise, it's going to enter that information in these three rows. It's going to create an error. So to do a special paste, we need to right click and then go to the paste options here. And remember, we want transpose option, transpose, which is right there. Okay, so we're going to transpose it, and it places it for us here in horizontal format. Then we're going to select L1. Which is right here. And then we're just going to go back to entry form right there. And then you can see that it's still selected, so we want to deselect that. So we're just going to click on the escape key on our keyboard, and that deselects that. And then we're going to click on B15, which is right here. Okay. And then we're going to stop recording right here. That's it for this part of the macro. All right. So now that we've created our macro, what we plan to do next is to display a confirmation message after users add a payment record to the late payment table. So basically, when folks come in here and enter information and click enter payment, we want something to come up here just letting them know that, hey, it's been entered. Your information has been entered. So that way they don't second guess what they've done and possibly do it multiple times, creating multiple entries that we don't need. All right, so to do this, we're going to edit the enter payment macro in the Visual Basic window. After the line of code that selects the B15 range B15 select, we're going to insert a few lines and then save the macro. All right, so the first thing we need to do is, well, edit that particular macro. So to edit any macro, you have to go to the macros dialog box. So we're going to go into developer. We're going to click on macros here. It's going to show us all the macros we've created, including the one we just recently created. And we're going to click on the, and what we want to ultimately edit is this payment here, or this macro here. So I accidentally called it late payment. This should have been called enter payment. So we're going to fix that as well here. So we're going to simply just click on enter payment here. Okay, change the title of that. We're also going to change the unofficial title here, enter payment, and now we'll be able to make this a lot easier to do what we want it to do. So we're going to add a bit of code here. So we're going to custom type in some code here that's going to go right after the range B15 select. So we want it to go right below that. So we're going to place our cursor here and then press enter, which brings us right there. And remember when entering this code, folks, to be very, very meticulous in how you write it. Any syntax error or spelling error or punctuation error or space error is going to throw off anything when you're coding. All right, so being meticulous is a big aspect of coding, regardless what kind of coding you're doing. Visual Basic is one of the easier ones to code because it's pretty user-friendly. But again, it has no room for errors here. It's not going to correct your errors like a word editing software. So you have to make sure that the context that you're placing in here is exactly the way that it requires based on the format of the language that we're using. In this case, Visual Basic for Applications, VBA. So I've already copied and selected this this text that we're going to be entering, but you can see here that it is very important, folks, again, to make sure you add the correct context, the text in the correct context here. So we're going to click on Tab here just to bring this over for us here. And it's all nicely aligned, and this is what we want here. We're going to save that by clicking this little icon there, and then we're just going to leave it open for now and move on to our next task. All right, so our next task is to apply this this macro to one of the buttons that we want. So we're just going to close that out there. We're going to check macros here, and you can see that the name Enter Payment has been changed there, so that's good. That's what we want. Next thing we want to do is apply that macro, that Enter Payment macro, which again will take the information here and bring it here, place it in this row in transposition format, so that way we don't have a vertical entering of the information, but rather a horizontal, right? So that's what transposition does for us. So to apply a particular type of macro, or to apply a macro to a button in this case, all we do is right click and then go to Assign Macro. When it asks you to assign macro, we're going to apply the Enter Payment macro. We're going to click OK. So now you'll notice when you hover over it, unlike it was before where it was just a pointer, now you see a hand pointing at it. So when you see a hand pointed at it, that means that there's something there that's going to be ran. It's going to be active once you click on it, right? In this case, it's going to be that macro that's going to take the information here and place it into our payments worksheet in that area there. But before that, we're going to do some changes here. So the data that we want is going to be account ID AC-1027. So we're going to change that to 1027. Okay, and that works out fine because it is an existing account ID from the column I that we hit earlier. So if it wasn't, it would not allow us to do that. So then we're going to go here to the date. The date is fine at 10/7/2021. We're going to change the amount paid to $3,100 instead of $1,000. And that's going to be placed there. So now we have this account ID data that we want to add, and all we're going to do is just add it. We're going to run it by clicking on the entry form, or entry payment button, excuse me. Okay, so we're just going to click there, and you can see now that we've gotten a, based on the last code that we manually entered into the VBA editor, it shows payment information entered. Right, so that's a confirmation that what we wanted to do, which is enter this information into the payments, has been done. Right, so you can see it here. I entered it once before accidentally, so it must have ran. So you can always just delete this by clicking delete, and then delete row here. There we go, and now we're good to go. All right, so now we can go back here to entry form, and we'll know that that has been entered in there. 3100 107 AC 1027. So it did work. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is test out another macro. It's going to be this clear entries macro. So when we look at the list, you'll see that this macro has been assigned actually to this button here. So all we want to do is test it. Make sure that when we click clear entries, that this is going to go away. right? We don't want this there anymore. So let's test it. We're going to click clear entry, and then we get a pop-up says you are ready to add another payment, enter an account ID. So this has already been created for us, and all these specifics were entered in the code when creating it. So we're going to click OK here, and now we're ready to enter another record if we so choose, which then we can just click on enter payment, and then it'll continue to be added here to this list, and then we can clear that entry by clicking here. So there's no need to delete each one of the files separately or the fields separately, which can get kind of tedious. So that's one of the great things of creating these macro enabled buttons here that can do these things for us. Alright, so the next few things that we're going to do are going to revolve around gathering information from a pivot table and bringing it into this particular worksheet. Specifically is in cells E4, G4, and G8. So we're going to get some get pivot table data functions to do this. And the storyline behind this goes, you want to display statistics about tuition payments in the range E3 through G12. This information is stored in the summary pivot table. And that is going to be inside of the payment summary worksheets, right? So all the information here that we want to get is what ultimately we want to go in these particular cells within this range here. In the merge cell E4 of the entry form, so we're going to make sure we go into E4 first. We're going to use the get pivot data function to display the number of registered students from cell B9 in the summary pivot table, which is in the payment summary worksheet, right? So we're going to take the information from B9 here, and that's what we want ultimately to show up right here, right? But there's a different way to do this when you're dealing with a pivot table, and you have to be very careful when creating this get pivot data function to work properly. Okay, and it isn't always what you think it might be, which is including B9 as part of the functions details. So we're going to go back to entry form here, and we're going to click on function dialog box. And that's going to insert function dialog box is going to pop up. I already have my get pivot data function here ready to go, so I'm going to click OK. And this is what the function argument looks like here. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is click on the data field type field, which is right here. And here we want information. Again, we wanted B9 from payment summary, which is actually part of the column called registered students. So we first need to put in quotations here, registered. And make sure to spell this exactly as is seen in the worksheet here. Any errors again could throw this off. All right, registered students. All right. Proper spelling of these words is like having the correct key to unlock a door. Otherwise, it just will not work. And now we're going to go into the pivot table, which is right here. And we're going to come back here. Boop. Let's redo that again. Alright, so we're going to redo that again. We're going to click on functions. Sorry, folks. It can get kind of tedious, so this is good that I messed up, so that way you can see what the errors are and how these errors can be fixed, right? So we just want registered students here, nothing else. Registered students. Then we're going to click on pivot table here. Make sure that was my error here. I left my cursor here, which then indicated when I switched topics here that it needed to enter some other information within this worksheet, right? So no, we don't want that. What we want is exactly what we see here. And all we're going to do, instead of clicking B9, which would be the automatic assumption here, we don't want to do that. We want to click on A2. Right, that's what we want, and we want to also make sure that that A2 is absolute reference, right? So we want to make sure to do an F lock on that, just like that, and then we're going to click OK. Right. So you see the 201 here is consistent with the 201 here, but we didn't click B9. Right. We just make sure we reference that registered students in the first field of that function dialog box, and then entered A2 as the first cell of the pivot table, and it knows exactly what we want it to populate here. So let's go back to the entry form here, and we're going to do another get pivot data function, but this time we're going to go here in G4, and this time we're going to click G4, and then again go to the function dialog box here, click OK, and in this particular one we're going to type in total paid, so we're going to put in parentheses, or excuse me, in quotes, total paid. Okay. And again, that's going to be one of the columns inside of the pivot table that we're going to be using. So we got to make sure that it's typed in correct. And I already made an error. It's not total paid. It is total billed. Total billed is what we want. Okay, so total billed is what we want here. And that's going to be with an end quote there. And then we're going to then click on pivot table, and then go to payment summary here, and the same thing that we did last time, we're going to click an A2, and then we're going to give this guy an absolute reference just like that. We're going to click OK, and that's going to put the correct value here. 1,887,841 is what we wanted there, which is consistent with that number there. Right, and then finally we're going to go here to G8, and we're going to enter a form and then display the total amount of tuition paid from cell D9 of the summary pivot table. So again, it's pretty much the exact same thing. We're just tweaking one particular item, and that's going to be the data field range here. So that's name range. So that's all we want to do. In this one, we're going to do the total paid. Total paid. And again, make sure to spell it exactly as you see it in the headers of the payment summary. We don't want to click on that yet until we move our cursor here, and then you'll go back here. So total paid, you see that? It's exactly the same way I spelled it for data field here. Data billed is the same thing, and registered students were the same thing. So make sure that spelling is exactly as you see it here, otherwise this won't work properly. So again, A2 is what we want to reference because this is the first cell of this particular table, pivot table. So then F4, just to give that an absolute value, we're going to click OK, and that's going to bring us back to that value there, which is consistent with what we have here. All right, so lastly, the last thing we're going to do here is to protect this worksheet, because although we do want folks to ultimately use this worksheet to enter information within it, we don't necessarily want them to mess around with some of these figures that we have here. We only want to really have them use the account ID, date, amount paid, and date and amount paid, and then be able to enter that payment and clear entries. So we don't want to lock or protect these cells here, but we want to protect everything else. We want to protect everything else, right? So in order to do this, we are going to first of all go to the Review tab. Right, so we're going to go to the Review tab here. So instead of clicking Protect Sheet, again, that will protect everything, including these three cells here, which we don't want to lock up or protect, or protecting the entire workbook, which we definitely don't want to do. We just want to deal with this one right now. We're going to click on Allow Edit Ranges. Okay, and then once we have allowed ranges here, allow users to edit range, we're going to click on New. And you can place a title here if you want. Sometimes placing a title here may be helpful in remembering what this is. So we can put entry cells or anything along those lines, something to help you remind you of what it is. And then which cells are we talking about? Well, we don't want these cells here, so we're just going to delete that, leave the equal sign there, and we're going to select C3 through C5. We could have also typed it in, but we're going to do it just like this for now. And then we're going to click OK. And then when this pops up, now we have ranges unlocked by a password when sheet is protected. Right, so this means we don't need a password. We could just leave them unlocked. So it's an option if you wanted to put a password in there that you could. But all we really need to do at this point is click Protect Sheet. Don't select Paste Permission Information into Worksheet. We don't need to modify anything. We've already selected the cells we want not to be protected when we do this. So we're going to click on Protect Worksheet at this point. Now it gives us the option here to enter the password if we so choose. But we don't want a password in here. So we're just going to click on OK. And now you can see that this sheet is protected, but these particular cells are not, and you will be able to modify these things however we want. Although everything else will not be able to be modified if we want. Like I just tried to delete that, and then we get this. right? This cell or chart you're trying to change is on a protected sheet. To make changes unprotected sheet, you might be requested to enter a password, right? But we didn't enter a password when we were creating this. So no one can mess around with any of these cells or anything in here except for these cells here, which will allow whoever is using this form to enter the student IDs here, account IDs, dates and amount paid, and ultimately place them here in this entry here. All right, so that is it, folks. Those are the main key components of Chapter 12. We're dealing with some macros and so forth are going to be one of the more challenging aspects of Excel, and running these or creating these macros and then applying these macros, tweaking the macros as we wanted to, which was going to require you to get a basic fundamental idea of what the visual editor, the VBA editor looks like, and entering code. That's where the most difficult part of this lesson comes in, is entering that code. Although, again, it's one of the easier codes to deal with. Most of these commands can be found online. You can learn so much even within Excel itself if you do some research on it. You can just about turn an Excel workbook into an actual program that works just as for example, a check-in at a doctor's office. We created one at the CBTE computer lab years ago, which would allow students to come in, enter their student ID, and then it'll log the time and date that they were in, and then also they would have to check out, and then they would log their checkout time as well. So these are the kinds of things you can do with Excel. You can also do that with Microsoft Access, but using Excel may be advantageous for you due to the differences in what those two applications do. So there's a lot you can do with Excel, folks. It's not just about creating awesome reports and using formulas and so forth to derive data that you want from a data source, but again, you can turn it basically into a program. You can literally turn it into a program that will only allow users to do certain things, which is pretty phenomenal for those who already know how to use Excel fairly well and are trying to convert this into some kind of program like the one that I explained. You can totally do that in Excel. And the more you know about using macros and creating those macros and buttons and things like that, the more powerful your skills are going to be in creating more elaborate projects that may be very advantageous, regardless whether you're running your own business or working in corporate America or working in just about any field that you want to work in that may require something like this. And it can be as elaborate as you want it to be, or as simple as you want it to be. But nevertheless, it's a great tool to use and know, so that way you can use these particular skills if need be. So thank you for watching this video, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.